So it's been a very long road to finally get to the end of this series, but this is Being Human, the series finale review. And this review, because I've never actually reviewed this series, is going to cover all the past seasons, my favorite moments, some of the crazy things that I remember from the past couple of years, and definitely put your favorite moments below, or least favorite moments, but everything you have about this show, you just put it below, because unfortunately sci-fi has ended this series, and it was a really good run. And if you've seen the original version on BBC, tell me if that's worth watching. Like, I know technically it got canceled, and I know why. I ended up seeing an episode when it was actually brand new, and I thought I spoiled a lot of stuff that was going to end up happening for the American version, but fortunately they changed the storyline so it wasn't exactly the same. But if you've seen the original one and you watched it all the way through, let me know if it's worth finishing out, if it at least ended well, because I know I did see the very first episode and I did enjoy that too. Like, I thought it was just a good show as well, which is obviously why we have the American version of it. But if you've seen the original and watched it all the way through, and this one, tell me how they compare to each other, and tell me if it's actually worth finishing up now that that's over as well. But it's been a really long road, and this season itself I felt like was a long road with so many crazy things happening, from alternate timelines, which were two amazing episodes. Probably they were my two favorite episodes this season, but they were definitely some of my favorite episodes out of the entire series. And then all the stuff about the wolves and the pack, I thought that was interesting. Josh being able to change when he wanted to was interesting. Two references to the Kool-Aid Men, which was just really funny when Aiden went through that wall. And then Sally and Aiden ending up together at the end of this was also something I really wasn't expecting. And Aiden having to deal with the fact that he had two people, in a sense, come back from the dead. His wife came back from the dead, really, and his son actually just stayed in town, which was really interesting. And they showed us that very early on. But if I knew this was the last season, which I wish I did before it started, I would have reviewed every episode, because this is one of my favorite shows that has ever been on. Like, I've loved every single season. Nothing has been crappy to me, and every season just gets better and better leading up to this. And it was an amazing final season, and I think the series finale itself was really well done. It wasn't too over the top. It ended with a storyline that didn't just come out of nowhere. It ended with a storyline that was introduced in, I believe it was the very first episode when Sally came back. And that was one of my favorite things about this season, was the whole Ramona storyline, where Sally, now being a witch, sort of a ghost witch, she's able to use spells, and then she ends up traveling through time, and she finds out that Ramona was killed in their house. And what I love about that storyline is that it's introduced in the first episode, and she looks into it for a couple of episodes. And when she actually finds the woman Beatrice, who is Ramona's sister, after that episode, it kind of just goes away until just before she goes back in time, I believe. And I thought, I completely forgot about that storyline. It wasn't even remotely in my head anymore, because they were dealing with being kicked out of the house and trying to figure out, what do we do now, and Sally having to figure out, how am I supposed to be this ghost witch and not get trapped in the past. All these little intricate details are coming together. And then they had it when Sally's brother came in, and I love that it is her actual brother. I thought that when he was first introduced, I just thought that's really cool that they were able to get her actual brother. And I'm assuming they're twins. Either they're actually twins, because they're obviously really brother and sister, or they just look really similar because they're brother and sister. But I would guess they're twins. I'd say they're the same age, but I don't actually know. But that's one of the great things about this season, is that they brought in a lot of the main people, and when he was brought in, that was a way for them to reintroduce the Ramona storyline when she attacked the little boy. And I thought that was really cool. And her character was actually really, really creepy, just because it's this little girl, and we don't know what her real story is. She seems okay, and she's just trapped in the house. And then there's the scene where she does sort of attack the boy, and it's like, well, she's now a little creepy. And even when Sally went to find her sister, at the end when they had the picture and she was just standing in the window, I thought that was just really creepy too. She's just looking outside. I thought that's really interesting. But I loved her storyline. I loved how they brought everyone back. For the most part, they brought everyone back. They had the really big characters throughout this series come in. They had Bishop come back, through the alternate timeline. They had Henry come back, which I thought was really cool. He was in the flashbacks when Sally went to the 1920s, or 1920s, and then he was there in the episode before last when he was the ghost version, and so he was actually in it quite a few separate times. But it was really cool. They brought back a lot of the big characters, basically the height of the wolf side and the height of the vampire side, with Aiden having to deal with Bishop being his dad still, and Sally and Josh having to deal with, I can't think of his name, but the wolf guy who pretty much, even in the alternate timeline, was a huge problem for them to deal with. So it was cool to see him come back as well. But it was an amazing season. There's so many cool things happened. A lot of things did wrap up, like Sally. Once again, I can't think of the witch's name, but Sally dealing with the witch and finding out her backstory, and they actually become friends in a sense. I thought that was really cool. And then, like I said, my two favorite episodes this entire season were the alternate timeline, where Sally goes through and she's trying to make everything better, and in a sense she kind of makes things worse. Instead of Josh getting with Nora, they don't end up together, and Sally ends up becoming a werewolf instead. She ends up dying, and Aiden becomes a monster. He goes back to his Ripper form because they fall in love, which I thought Aiden, in the beginning of this season, dealing with his wife coming back and dealing with his son and having to deal with the struggle between not being able to control himself and trying to decide whether or not he wants to live a normal human life for as long as he can, at least. I really thought he was going to end up with the woman that he fell for in the last season, and I thought she was going to be the person he stuck with. And it seemed like it was going to be the simple storyline where he tells her, she freaks out for a little bit. It'll be 3 or 4, maybe 5 episodes, and then she'll come around and he'll help her adjust to him being a vampire, and they'll end up together. But she found out and she just couldn't handle it, and she was gone, and I thought that really sucks for him. And then they just tied it all together where Sally goes through this alternate timeline, and then she falls in love with Aiden, so he never really ends up meeting anyone else. And I love how that ended up working out, because throughout this series, one of the greatest things they did was write the show in a way that was completely devoid, in my my memories of it, it was completely devoid of any sort of sexual tension. And I thought that was really cool how through all these seasons and all these episodes of them saving each other and almost killing each other through weird, crazy things going on left and right, they ended up together. And it was just really surprising to me, at least. If you guys thought that was going to happen, definitely put it below. But I thought it was a great moment in this season and the series as a whole, because it was fairly surprising to me. Because, like I said, very devoid of any sexual tension. Obviously, Megan Raph is very attractive. You can't deny that. And there was the tiny little notion where Aiden was drunk on blood, and he mentioned, he was like, I just want to get with you. That was the most tension they ever had in the entire series, I think, outside of maybe a few other random lines. But that was really it. It would just be a little line here and there. And I don't think, from all the episodes I can remember, and there's a ton of stuff I don't remember, of course, I don't think either Aiden or Josh ever actually said that she was attractive in any way. They probably did in the first season when they actually were able to see her and they were sort of alone. They probably did mention that she was cute or something, but I think that was about it. And like I said, everything else fairly strict. They were just friends, and of course Josh and Nora ended up together, so it was just Aiden and Sally who were the single people, and Aiden was constantly trying to be with someone, and of course killing them off, unfortunately. But it was just really good how they ended up together, to me at least. And of course in this series finale, when Sally sacrifices herself, which was very sad, it was of course depressing to see her go, he ends up sacrificing himself in the end for Josh and Nora so that they can live out their full lives and have children, which I thought was really well done. And I love the fact that he was in such turmoil, because it seemed like he was doing fine, and then we find out that all the years he skipped, or survived really because he was a vampire, are catching up with him. And so he's getting old, and they put the makeup on him, which I thought was really well done. How he ages super quick in this episode, because I initially just thought he'll just become a witch like the other witch did. Like, I wish I could remember her name so much right now. But when we got to learn her storyline, she became a witch because the other witches sacrificed the spirit of one of their coven and basically transferred her power into her. And I thought that's what Sally was doing. Take out Aiden, transfer her soul and her power into him, and then he would become a witch. And I thought that's how he was going to end up defeating Ramona, and I thought he would somehow realize he has this power, maybe at the last minute or so. But instead, we find out he's just human, and he's dying rapidly. And I thought that was so interesting. And he sacrifices himself, and he does become a ghost, which was the biggest thing he was dealing with, because he knows as a vampire you don't get to get a door, you don't become a ghost and get to move on. You're done because you're sort of an abomination. Even werewolves get to become ghosts and get doors. And in this episode, he had a really great moment that I loved, where he becomes just desperate to become a vampire again, and he's afraid to do it. And Josh actually goes to meet him, and he like hugs him because he's freaking out. He's scared to die. I thought that was an amazing scene, and it was one of those moments that was just really good between Josh and Aiden, where they are just like best friends, and all Aiden can do is just hug his best friend because he's scared to die. But he does get his door, and it came fairly quickly, which he had to. It's the final episode, but he gets his door, and in that door, Sally is there, which was good. And I love the fact that Josh and Nora were actually able to see that Sally was there. I just enjoyed that because they knew that both of them were happy and both of them were actually together. And it was cool to see that Sally didn't just vanish. She actually, I guess because it was a sacrifice or something, who knows why it really happened, but she was able to go to heaven in a sense, if that's what you want to call it. She went to heaven, and Aiden got his door, and that's where she was, so they got to be together. And then the episode ends, and it was just really nice. And Josh and Nora, they're dreaming about Sally and Aiden, and then they wake up and they have their kids, who they of course named Sally and Aiden, and that was nice. And they're living their life, and assumingly Josh owns the pie shop, or he owns some sort of little shop like he did in an alternate timeline. So that was cool, and it was a great way to end the series. It was nice and peaceful, and they defeated their final enemy, which was the house itself, which I actually thought was an amazing idea. And they get to live their lives. But this entire series had so many crazy moments. Most of them I would personally say had to do with Aiden, because he had so much crazy stuff to deal with, because he had such a love-hate relationship with all of these huge components within the vampire world. And Bishop is one of the leading figures. So in that alternate timeline where Aiden does become a huge part of the community and he doesn't end up killing Bishop, it's just amazing to see how him actually rising in the ranks and them getting so much money and being able to feed all the vampires and become rich basically makes him go down that path where all he wants to do is leave Boston, where in the initial timeline he went through so much crap. The last thing he wanted to do was be a part of Boston's vampire network. I believe it was the past 2 seasons, or maybe it was just the last season. All he wanted to do was just stay out of anything the vampires were doing, and he kind of had to get wrapped up in it again because his son is now the leader. And it was just an amazing way how he, with the power he had, he was so strong that he could compel other vampires. And even though he died, he pushed Aiden into that mode where it was all Josh's fault, because Josh was the one that killed Astrid. And I love that I can remember her name, but I can't even remember Aiden's son. But he was so angry at Josh when he found out that that's what happened. But all those components, like just that whole thing always led to trouble with Aiden. Him being a part of the vampire, being a huge component of the vampire network, knowing Mother and being with the daughter even though he technically wasn't supposed to be, and she was killed off, and Mother was killed off, and Bishop is killed off, and almost everyone is just dead except for Aiden, who is important. And in this alternate timeline, it was great to see that when everyone's alive, all Aiden wants to do, now that he knows the future, it actually turns him into the evil version that he used to be. And when Sally goes back to save him when the plague hits, or the virus hits, he just wants to leave Boston. I thought that was really good. It was, even though, of course, he turns around at the very end and he wants to be with Sally because she was the love of his life. It was just really, really well done to see everyone come back and him being the evil person. And when they have that confrontation right after Sally dies, and he does sort of go crazy, and he leaves Josh alive when it's him and Bishop. I love that scene too, and it shows how evil he was, and he was mocking Josh for hating the fact that he was a wolf and hating the fact that in the initial timeline he's supposed to be with Nora, and Aiden just mocks him for that and does the fake crying and stuff. I thought this type of Aiden, that's the worst he could possibly be, and I loved seeing that because it was so crazy, just mentally, to actually hear him tear down Josh like that, because he wouldn't do it in the original timeline. So I love those two episodes because of how crazy Aiden is. But everyone in this show obviously has huge points. Like Josh with the wolves in this season, they were really crazy. I thought it was going to be simple. Josh and Nora helped them have their baby. He was going to kind of join the pack, then obviously he didn't because he cheated with the one guy's wolf, his wife's wolf, or whatever. And I thought that was it. And then he and Nora broke up, which was one of the big things in this season. Josh, I realized from episode 1 of this season, got the shortest stick of any person in any universe, and apparently in any timeline, because even in the alternate one, all that really happened was he lost Nora, even though he knew he was supposed to be with her. He saw Sally die, who he cared about. He saw his maker die, and he knew that was his last chance. And then he just ended up alone. And he had the little shop, so he sort of built himself back up. But even in every episode, it just seemed like nothing he did was good for him. And nothing was really his fault. Like, the spell wasn't on him. He was tricked, or wasn't necessarily tricked, but he kind of got pushed into being stuck into his wolf form. It wasn't like he wanted to do that, obviously. So that was the first thing that happened. Then the spell happens and everyone thinks, oh, everything's great, except for Sally, because she knows the spell isn't finished. And then he can't control his wolf, and just problems and problems abound for him. And ultimately, of course, it works out. But he went through so much crap in this season that it made me love him as a character even more than I normally do, especially in the first couple episodes, because he wasn't his normal funny self, because he had so many problems to deal with. Like, he was only himself for one night a month, and other than that, he was the wolf. And that was between seasons. They skipped 3 months, so it was him just depressed. And when he finally got out of it, he was still just stuck, not really knowing what to do after these 3 months. But he had the shortest stick ever in this season, but ultimately he came out on top, and he was able to live his good, happy, silly, funny character life, which I really enjoyed. But love this final episode, love the series as a whole. Like I said, just some of the moments in it are memorable because the writing was so well done, and mostly the stuff with Aiden, like I said, he was the one who really, he was where all the deaths really occurred. And even though most of the characters were bad guys, it was still crazy to see who would live and who would die, because Aiden, even though he wanted all these people to be killed off, or, well, not all of them, he wanted some of these people to be killed off, at the same time, he still loved those people. And it was just crazy. Like, the whole Bishop thing was an amazing first season, and then they kind of wrap all that up within 2 hours in the alternate timeline, when he deals with having to go against Mother and losing who was once the love of his life. And he goes through that, and then losing his son to the virus, who was Henry, I believe, and then losing his second son himself. It was just that all the deaths are just his timeline, which Ramona does point out. Even though Sally woke her up, he was the one that fed her. And that, I thought that was a really great line, because, like I said, he is the one with all the deaths in his story. And Josh and Nora do deal with the full breed or full breed werewolves at that one point, but that's only 3 people. But that was also really good because I love that storyline their when the twins' father came in after they were killed. That was just really intense stuff for me because he was very powerful. He was strong, and he knew what to do against Aiden, and he knew how to use his alpha status to affect the mind of the girl that they adopted when she ended up becoming a werewolf. And I thought all of that was just amazing. And then it kind of happens all over again in this season when Astrid has to come in and she's about to kill Nora so that all the werewolves can take Josh because he's so special, and then he kills all of them. It was just an insane season, and they really built up their death toll in this season compared to Aiden killing who knows how many people. But love this series, loved every season. Definitely comment below, let me know what you guys saw of the last episode, favorite parts of the episode, favorite parts of the series, and of course your least favorite parts. And since the series is over and we kind of have to sadly move on from our ghost, werewolf, vampire triangle of just craziness, who is your favorite character out of the entire series? Even if it's not one of the main characters, who is one of the best people you've seen in the show? Whether it's one of the random hero people who there weren't a lot of good people that kind of passed through because most of the people were bad, but whether it's one of the few good people who randomly ended up dying, or whether it was one of the many great villains in the series, who's your favorite character? If I had to pick one, I don't know who it would be, but I don't know, probably Aiden, and that's because I do enjoy his storyline so much because for one, we get so much stuff from the past, so that's just a stylistic thing that we get to see. But like I said, his storyline being so varied with him constantly struggling more than even Josh, even though he hates being a wolf, more than anyone, Aiden struggled to be human because in order to survive, he has to kill other people. Well, he doesn't have to, but it's so much better when he does end up doing that. It feels so much better for him. So I'd have to say, even with this alternate timeline giving him a brown jacket, he'd probably have to be my favorite character. But comment below, let me know what you guys think, and thanks for watching.